Hello, everyone. We're going to start in about 20 or 30 seconds, so please stand by. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This is the MBO Partners webinar series, and we have a pretty interesting topic today, working to live, not living to work, which is 5 insights into the Gen X independent workforce, which we will be sharing our newly released research on this segment of the independent workforce. Before we get into the actual presentation, I will go through a few administrative issues with you. First, my name is Gene Zaino. I'm the President and CEO of MBO Partners, and I really appreciate everybody being in attendance today. And for those of you that may not know who MBO Partners is, we've been in business for over 25 years, and everything we do is focused on making it easy for independent consultants and their clients to work together. And if you want to learn more about what it is that we do, please join our webinar series, visit our website. A lot of good information, and our website is www.mbopartners.com. On your screen in the top right-hand corner, you'll see a couple of icons that I just want to point out and bring to your attention. There's a full screen icon that will maximize the presentation area for you that you could click on to get the full screen. We really like to have questions. So the way we handle that is there's a little hand icon that you'll see on your screen there where we're pointing. And if you just hit that, this little hand here, we'll get a little notification. You will be able to type in or raise your hand, and we can open up the lines actually and have you tell us your question live. Or if you want, you could just quickly enter a question and type it in through the chat box. Either way is fine, and please bring up your questions whenever you'd like. I'll stop periodically and read your questions, or certainly open up the line so that it is you could say your question to us live. Everybody's on mute currently, but now and then when we do get questions, we'll open that up. So I want to introduce our guests today, our speakers. Steve King and Carolyn Ockels are partners of the Emergent Research. They've been studying the small business and independent workforce markets here in the United States for over a century, over a decade. Sorry about that, Steve.
I'm feeling very old.
I think just about 12 years now. And Steve and Carolyn have done our landmark research that we've started in 2011, the State of Independence, and the Independent Workforce Index, which we're pretty proud of and has really received a tremendous amount of attention by many, both government and public press and the industry. So Steve and Carolyn are here live today with me to talk about the data specifically about the Gen X generation. So I'm going to hand it over to Steve and Carolyn and let them walk you through some interesting information. And again, please don't hesitate to ask questions. Steve.
Thanks, Gene. It's good to be here. What we're going to do today is talk about Generation X, a demographic cohort that was born roughly between 1965 and 1979. And I say roughly because there's actually no firm definition of any of the generations, whether we're talking about baby boomers or the millennials or Gen X. Everybody has different definitions of how old they are and what ages they were born between. But these are pretty much the generally accepted, most widely used dates for Gen X and the ones that we use. They're currently about 33 to 48 years old, plus or minus a year, depending upon whose definition you use. And the interesting thing about them is they're sandwiched between two much larger generations in terms of demographics, and that's the older baby boomers, of which there is almost 80 million of, as well as the younger Generation Y group, which is about a little less than 80, about 75 million, again, based on our definitions. There's some slight definitional differences. And I like to refer to them as the Rodney Dangerfield generation, Gen X, because they're sandwiched between these two very large generations, they tend not to get any respect. They don't get respect from researchers. They don't get a lot of attention from the media. And so we were very interested in tracking them. That's one of the key reasons we were so excited about tracking them and doing a little in-depth dive on Gen X, is because they do get so little attention from the popular press today. And so that's what we're going to go through. It's an interesting generation. They actually grew up during a period. They were our first latchkey generation, if you remember back, and they were often referred to as the slacker generation in the 90s when they first entered the workforce. As the first generation that was latchkey, they watched their parents, often both parents, work very hard, get committed to work, and then in the late 70s and early 80s go through a very rough recession where, despite their hard work and effort, they were laid off. Lost their jobs, had a lot of economic dislocation and trouble with their parents. And we often react to, every generation kind of reacts to what happens to their parents. And so they came to work saying, I'm not going to just be, my life's not going to just be about work. I'm going to, in addition to my work life, I'm going to have a personal life. And when they entered the workforce, that's why they got the name slacker generation, because they said, I want a life outside of work. That name has since, of course, been dropped from the vocabulary. You don't hear it used much anymore. But that is how they started, and they hold that attitude today, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The other interesting thing about the Gen X generation is, in terms of their work life, they came of age during a period mostly known as the Great Moderation economically. And the Great Moderation is a term that economists use to describe the period from roughly 1984 to 2007. And that was a period where the economy actually went quite well, and on average just kind of chugged along at a decent rate. We had modest recessions in 1991-92, and again in 2000 and 2001, but they were all relatively small recessions, and didn't have a huge impact on the work and the life of the Gen Xers. And so they kind of came of age during a fairly good economic period. And again, we'll talk about more what that means in terms of how they become independent workers. If you look at so that's the overview of the Gen Xers in general. If we go a little deeper and look at the independent workers, and when we talk about independent workers, we're talking about independent consultants, self-employed, freelancers, temps, other folks that have alternative worker relationships instead of traditional employment relationships. And based on our research, this is a U.S. study that we've done for 2 years in a row now, and there are about 5.9 million Gen X independent workers in the United States. As you can see from the chart, that's about 35% of the total. Pretty much tied with baby boomers in terms of the largest cohort being independent. And this is out of a group of about 17 million overall independent workers. And so they're heavily represented, and that's not surprising. They're at the age that's the middle of their career. You know, mid-30s into mid-40s is a key part of anybody's career, and a lot of them have chosen independence. It's interesting to look at it. It's about 50-50 male-female, which is true for independent workers overall. Their average income is $51,000. That's about average for this group in total. Interestingly enough, income with independent workers relates to age. Are the group that has the highest average income are the older baby boomers. The younger Gen Y workers are lower than Gen X. The mature workers, which in our analysis are sort of 66 and older, tend to have lower income, but they also work much fewer hours. So the Gen X is the income's fairly strong. That 51,000 is also about the average median or average, both median and average income for the nation as a whole, household incomes.
So Steve, we have a question. What is the definition of matures?
The matures is the people that are older than baby boomers, and we have them as 67 and older. And so most studies actually don't look at the matures. They've been considered that they've aged out of the workforce. And when we started the study a few years ago, we realized actually in part from your members, the people that work with MBO partners, there was actually quite a few matures in there. And so we wanted to make sure that we covered this cohort. And of course, workforce participation rates among older Americans has been increasing over the last decade and is expected to continue to increase. And so the matures are 67 plus. That group's often described broadly as the silent generation, but we stay with kind of the 67 plus as the matures.
And do we know the tenure as independent workers of 9 years, how that compares to the other cohorts?
Yeah, the average tenure across the entire group is a little over 10 years. The 9 years is, and so it's pretty close to average. Obviously, it's another case where the Gen Yers are lower. The Gen Yers, because they're younger, their average tenure is in the 4 to 5 year range. The baby boomers' average tenure is in the 14 to 15 year range, and then the matures is even higher. So, but the tenure is interesting. It's been about 9 years, and if you look again at their ages today, you'll see that a lot of them started their path of independence in their early 30s, old enough to have established themselves in their field, to create some skill sets and knowledge, and also create the kind of social networks and business networks to get work easily as an independent worker.
So do you think that the 9 years is something that is particular to each cohort, or do you think it might also be that around the 2000 change in the millennium, there was more of a surge of people in general doing independent work?
Well, we've been seeing an increase in the number of people doing independent work for the last decade, and so we have a shift going on that is a case of more and more people doing it. So the numbers are getting larger, and I think that does impact this average tenure. Yep. And then we also think, based on our research, it's just very helpful to establish yourself, to develop some skills, develop the networks and the confidence to go out on your own. So a combination of those things means that you sort of do that, you can start to do that when you're a little older. The interesting thing about the average tenure of baby boomers, in some ways it's a bifurcated tenure. That you have a lot of baby boomers that only have 2 to 3 years, 4 years experience, and then you have a lot with 20 plus. And that's a function of older boomers making the decision to leave their traditional employment, either voluntarily or not, and continue on to their next phase of their life as independent workers.
Interesting.
And so you see more of that in that age group, where you have a lot of newbies too, because of encore career reasons.
Should we go to the next slide?
Next slide. So when we look at the Gen Xers, one of the things that's really clear about them is that they really chose to become independent on average. They're actually our highest percentage of any of the demographic cohorts to do that, And again, it goes back to, we discussed the Great Moderation. As they were coming into the workforce, you can see that only 4% of them had trouble finding employment versus 18% of the respondents who were not Gen X. It's an interesting contrast with Gen Y. Gen Y came of age during basically this last recession, which we like to call the Great Recession. It wasn't a depression, but it was a much bigger recession than, it was the biggest recession since the Great Depression. And so that group, when you look at Gen Y, 25% of us told us that 25% of Gen Yers told us that they could not find a job when they were entering the market. So this group came of age, got traditional jobs on average, worked, and then decided to, on their own, move over and choose independence. And so 68% of them did so. And you can see that very low levels of lost jobs. Only 8% say that one of the reasons that they're an independent worker is they're unable to find a traditional job. And when you, again, you look at their ages and their growth, they were at a very good age during the last recession. They were in their 30s and 40s, early 40s. They were in mid-career. And if you look at who lost their jobs, older workers lost their jobs and younger workers lost their jobs, much more so in the last recession than the mid-career folks. And so they were at the right age. They didn't have quite as much dislocation, but they've continued to choose to go independent. And they're also old enough that they've developed those skills and developed their expertise and developed their networks to be able to do that. So there are a group that's by far chose independence more than the others.
So Steve, we have a question, if we could, from one of our listeners. Does independent work styles become permanent for Gen X, or do they eventually return to traditional jobs? What do we think?
It's actually both. When we ask that specific question, do you ever plan to return to traditional employment? About a third to 40% say potentially. Most do not plan. Only about 12% plan to go back to traditional employment in the next couple of years. But what we are seeing is, particularly with Gen Xers and Gen Yers, a career path expectation now where they will be independent and then maybe go back to a traditional job for a while and then go independent again. And so it's matrixed and latticed back and forth between the two types of employment. There will be a class here that for them it is permanent, and we suspect that's probably more than half, but there will be groups going back and forth. So it's a little bit of both now, and I think this reflects the broader nature of the workforce now and of the job market.
Right.
I think pretty much we believe most people over the course of their careers now will spend time as independent workers. Companies are choosing to use more contingent workers, to use more freelancers, to use more consultants instead of traditional employees, and more people are looking for the freedom and flexibility that being an independent worker provides. And so we're going to see it bounce back and forth. And what's really interesting is for us, we're trying to understand what's causing that. Is that, is lifestyle having a big impact in the life stage? And the answer is, of course, yes. And then, what groups? But in general, and this is a really good question, we believe you're going to see a lot of to and fro. Yep. From traditional employment and non-traditional employment. So in addition to choosing independence, the Gen X independents are highly satisfied being independent workers. And 88% of them report to us that they were either satisfied or highly satisfied. And this gets back to the question you asked before. 64% tell us that they plan to stay independent, and an additional 12% plan to build a bigger business. And when we talked about seeking a full-time job, we asked this question. It's over the next 2 to 3 years. And so only 12% are planning to get a traditional full-time job in the next 2 to 3 years. We asked an additional question around, would you ever consider a traditional job? And that's where we got the higher percentage saying yes. But in the near term, they plan on staying independent. They're very happy with it. And it's interesting when you look at the 12% number, that's the group that's considering building a bigger business, adding more employees. And that's a pretty exciting number for us to see, because that shows that this group is also the source of a lot of the new small businesses that employ people going forward, in addition to being the consultants and freelancers that work on their own. So a highly satisfied group planning on staying with it, and also a decent chunk planning on building bigger businesses this way.
Thanks.
Okay, so then we come to the question of why are they so satisfied? And we've been trying to understand Gen X, and they really are the first generation that came to the workforce saying, I'm going to work on my own terms. We've heard that a lot with Gen Y, but it really did start with these Gen Xers who didn't want to work like their parents worked. If we see what they were looking for, it's really flexibility. They want to be able to define work so that it supports their lifestyles rather than just working to live. And we see in this that they're Gen X, they see work as supporting a lifestyle, and that they are controlling their career, that they get to do the projects that they like. They're very interested in staying engaged. They don't want to get bored in a routine job, and so they like the flexibility that independence gives them to do different types of projects that are driven by their passions.
And I hear this so much, Carolyn, that people that really find themselves in the groove of being independent in their career, they really do have this sense of, I'm going to do it the way I want to do it, and do work that they love. So it's great to see this in statistically back to us what we hear anecdotally.
Absolutely. And I think that there's some of the, when you get back to the slacker generation definition, or sort of that tag that they had to wear for a while,
right.
Because they were the first ones to come out with this on my terms, they were seen as not willing to work, when they really were willing to work very hard, but within the structure that supported their lifestyle.
And I'd add that it's interesting to me that Gen X started this. There's a lot of discussion now about Gen Y, the people entering the workforce today insisting on more flexibility and more freedom and more control. And it was really Gen X that came to the workforce and said, that's what I'm looking for. And now when we start in the survey results of baby boomers, the percentage of them saying, I'm now looking for flexibility, I'm looking for more control, those numbers have been going up over certainly the last decade, and in particular the last 5 to 7 years. And so I think we can really thank Gen X for introducing these concepts, and I think traditional employment has a long way to go in terms of providing the kind of flexibility that people are looking for. But I think Gen X is the group that really brought this issue up initially, and now the other generations are also following their lead. Where the reference of slacker,
I actually think from a productivity point of view, when people do what they love, they tend to be good at it, they tend to be more productive at it, and they tend to provide more value. So I would venture to say that people that are working on their own terms and are doing what they love are actually providing more value and more productivity to our economy.
Absolutely.
It's just my personal opinion, what I see. I think people that are doing a job for a job are probably not only not being happy, but they're maybe not doing it the best that it can be done. Anyway.
Next slide. Well, we also see Gen X as what we call them the gig gurus, and we're looking at this. If we look at the different categories of how the Gen Xers self-describe, they really fall into the independent contractor, independent consultant categories more than anything else. They do not self-identify as small business owners as much, or micro business owners as much as other cohorts do. But they really like this independent lifestyle that allows them to dictate and control their own lives. We see that the gig gurus bring a lot of skills to the table. They're very comfortable with technology. They are not native technology kids, as we call the digital natives of the Gen Y or millennial groups, but they did grow up using technology at a very early age, and they were the first generation to really understand all of the different social medias and Dreamweaver and things that brought a lot of creativity and new dimensionality to work or to how we present work. So very interesting group. They're highly educated. 60% have had some college. They are more educated than boomers, and both with graduate degrees and undergraduate degrees. Let's see. And one of the real interesting things about Gen Xers is that they're real economic realists. They're the first group that really sees that working as an independent contractor or consultant may be a necessity, that their industries are starting to expect that, or that creates opportunity for them if they're flexible. So about 1 out of 4, 25% says that they, or 23% say that their industries dictate that.
Well, we have a question that just popped up. Question is, was marital status considered in the study? And there's a follow-on question. Were married Gen Xers more open to independent lifestyle, dependent on traditional working spouse for healthcare benefits, pensions, etc.?
That's a really good question. We were actually discussing this before over lunch today. The marriage rates in this group are about the same as the overall population, and so there isn't a huge difference in terms of being married. And so we have about the same number of people that report being single as we would the general population. The same trues for marriage. And so it's interesting. One of the things that we thought several years ago before we started doing these numerical the surveys is that we would find that the spouse issue would be a big one. It is not proven to be so. The numbers and other studies have supported it. We are finding, interestingly enough, that on average, independent workers have fewer children or are more likely to be childless, or I should say not have children in the home, as the overall economy, as the overall population. And it's a really interesting finding. One of our theories originally was that a lot of people would choose independence to provide the flexibility to also be able to take care of children. The data is not bearing that out. We're going to have to we need to do a lot more work on this, but we've been digging on it for the last 3 or 4 weeks to better understand it. And so we are seeing that on the children's side. But on the marriage side, we didn't see any big differences. And it's interesting, in the small business world, we do see that somewhat a little bit more. If you look at owners of small businesses with employees, and particularly with more than 5 employees, are much more likely to be married than the population overall. But for independent workers, it was about the same.
Yeah, really good question. And again, thanks for these questions. They're really good, and keep them coming, and we'll reveal them as soon as we get them.
Just one more point on that slide. One of the fun things to see about Gen X is that they are defining careers in a different way. And so they started it, and I think Gen Y will probably follow suit. But they really see work as a project portfolio. And so they're not just trying to build a career resume. They show within their work, within this portfolio of different types of projects, they actually show their expertise. And so it's pretty evident to see what they bring to the table.
And again, that makes sense because, they're focused on specialized skills. And, given the fact that technology and many things are changing so quickly, you need to develop new skills. And the best way to do that is to build a portfolio of projects that use that skill, and you could prove that you have it. And it's hard to do that within one organization, so you tend to want to go across different companies to focus and get deep on your skills and build that project portfolio. So again, that makes sense to me, and it's something I hear from our people. And
it gives them a lot of bounce back capability when there are structural shifts in the economy. They have a lot of versatility to their skill set, and so they can find something to stand on.
Yeah. One comment, I just want to make sure everyone, some people are asking, can they get the slides, or will they have this presentation available later? The answer is yes, you will get copies of these slides, and it is being recorded, so you could listen to it later. So we're getting a lot of questions about that. I'm going to go to the next slide now. Okay.
Great. All right. Another really interesting trait about Gen X is that they're a creative generation, and we're finding that creativity really trumps money in terms of what motivates them. Of all of the generations, we said when we looked at the different categories of how people describe their occupations, when we looked at the creatives, boy, Gen X just they took about half of the total for people that identified as artists or writers or performers. Very solid percentage, almost double the non-Gen X categories when it comes to creatives and design. They're strong in media, and so things that where they can be creative in what they do is very important to Gen X. A number of theories have come up about this, that because they were latchkey kids and it was before there was a lot of tech available for them to be playing around, they had to keep themselves more occupied, and they learned to be creative more, and that they've carried that through in their careers. I think they've learned an awful lot of tools as well that give them that allow them to bring creativity to the workplace. So we found that to be a very exciting finding. The money of all of the categories, of all of the different cohorts, they're just not as motivated by money. So that's an interesting finding, and I think a very important thing for the workplace to understand, but also when we're looking at how Gen X is going to be making decisions on independence, that flexibility is definitely the stronger motivator. The last thing here is that passion comes out a lot. Doing what I love, it just comes out time and time again in everything that they talk about. And so it's not a complete surprise that the creativity is there, because that allows that passion to come through.
Yeah, bringing real purpose to what it is that
Absolutely.
you do is important.
Now, independence isn't all rosy. There are some challenges for independence, and I'm sure many of you listening to the webinar could tell us more about this than we can tell you. But we find that this varies quite a bit by cohort. But each generation has its own set of worries and concerns, and different ways of dealing with them. For Gen X, they're really probably more life cycle issues that come up than anything else. They're very realistic about what independence means and what the responsibilities are for taking control of their lives, because that's why they've chosen it. But they do worry about retirement. They're very cognizant that Social Security is not really going to be there for them, or that's their assumption. And so they're looking about, how can I plan financially for myself or for my family? Uncertain income stream comes up as one of the challenges for independence. That's a big issue for everybody, obviously, but for Gen X, given the life cycle and the financial responsibilities they have, that's the biggest concern. And it takes a lot of planning with independence. So retirement I mentioned, and then worried about the future overall. They're worried, but again, they're at that point where you really do have to figure out what's the future going to look like and what am I going to do about it.
I feel more secure working independently is a really interesting data point. The Gen Xers are actually pretty close to the rest of the group. The average for the whole group was 39%. It's 40% for not Gen X and 37% for Gen X. But the interesting thing for us is we've only been asking this question for a couple years, but anecdotally, I can tell you going back a decade, we used to ask this question in different ways than this specific question. And if we were to guess, we would say probably no more than, before the recession, probably no more than 1 in 5, 20% would have said this. And what's happened is people are viewing traditional employment as much riskier than it used to be. And when we get under the hood here and we ask people, well, how could you feel more secure? The answer is that they feel they have more control. They're not subject to the whims of a boss or a faraway corporate headquarters that may shut down their division. And also, most of them have multiple income streams, and so they feel that, yeah, they could lose one client or one of their income streams, but because they have multiple income streams, they can't lose everything at once. And so we're watching this data point very carefully. It was 33% on average last year's survey. It went up, and because this is an indication both of the uncomfortableness people have with traditional employment, but also how they're reacting to this new world of work and getting more secure with it.
It's diversification, just like a financial advisor would tell you to diversify your investments. I think what these people are saying, and certainly we've been saying this for a while, you want to diversify your income streams. So if one client goes bad or one project gets cut for whatever reason, at least you don't have all your eggs in one employer basket. And I totally think that's once people really get into and understanding how to work independently, I really think that is a very true statement that they could be more secure working independently.
And since the Gen Xers have already defined themselves as these project portfolio managers, they're stepping into this role a little bit more in tune and ready to understand this way of managing their financial lives.
Yeah. So we have another question that did we find that the members in the study were astute in financial planning or more responsible with spending than the other groups because they are realist about their volatile income?
Yeah, we didn't actually ask about, we didn't go much into personal financial planning or personal financial skills into the study, but I can tell you from our interview work and our other work that that being successful at being independent means learning how to deal with finances and learning how to deal with the uneven income stream. And so to this is yes, but we don't have the specific numbers. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. Yeah, I think that we've talked about this being the you're in charge economy as independents take control of their professional lives, and being in charge means both being responsible and getting to lead the ship, but also being responsible for the decisions. So there's what we call the burden of empowerment, and you do need to anticipate risk and plan for it as an independent. But once you start doing that, you have an awful lot of flexibility in how you work, where you work, and when you work.
Absolutely.
So when we're looking to the future, the next 5 to 10 years, for this generation, it's actually a generation we think is just beginning in terms of their growth in independent work. We're anticipating and forecasting that we'll see more and more Gen Xers choose independent work. They're entering the prime years. When you actually look at the years when folks start their own businesses, the highest age, the cohort that starts the businesses the most is actually between ages of 45 and 54. And now it's even shifting a little older. It's been 45 to 54. The last year or two, it's sort of tied with 54 to 65. And it's mostly these folks have been in the workforce for a while, and they're moving on to encore careers. And so the Gen Xers are just entering those prime years to go independent, to start their own businesses and move forward. So that's one reason why we think we're going to see more Gen Xers go independent. We're also seeing the beginnings, despite our high unemployment rate, and despite all the dislocations within the economy, we're already starting to see the signs of the much forecasted talent war. The talent war has been forecasted for many years. The Great Recession obviously delayed the beginnings of the war in any meaningful way. But at this point now in the economy, we're seeing a number of positions and types of positions, software engineering, increasingly skilled designers, particularly web designers, that are in high demand. Carolyn and I in Emergent Research is based out of San Francisco. where we see a constant war for talent going on in the software engineering field, in the design field, and in the marketing field, where the tech companies are fighting over it. This is spreading across a broader economy. And so going forward, these independents will be in greater demand, and if you're in greater demand, that'll create more supply. It's a classic economic piece. And then the appeals of freedom, control, and flexibility are not going away, and more people are looking for that. And what we've also found is we've in many ways reached a tipping point where more and more people understand that becoming independent is a viable career option, and that leads to more people being willing to do it. We saw this for businesses working at home. The shift happened there in the 90s and into the 2000s, where working from home suddenly was acceptable. Being independent has become acceptable, and even now many people look to those independent workers and wish they could do it too. And so the appeal has gone up, and we've reached a tipping point in it. And then the last piece is our economy is becoming more contingent in terms of the workforce. More and more companies are choosing to hire contingent workers, often independent workers, instead of traditional employees. And the numbers vary, but sort of 20 to 25% of large corporate workforces now are contingent, and we expect it, along with everybody else, expects those percentages to grow. Every corporation that we meet with tells us they're planning to adding more contingent workers in relative to the number of full-time employees that they have. So there's a series of trends coming together that mean that we're going to see more independent workers in general, and more Gen X independent workers over the next 5 years. And we were actually forecasting by 2022, we'll have about 23 million, up from the 17 million today, will be in the workforce. And our definition of independent workers for the purpose of this is people that work more than 15 hours a week. If you do the entire group, including people that work less than 15 hours a week, the part-timers, you start to get up close to 50% of the total workforce will be independent in some form in the 2022 to 2023 range, so out about 10 years from now.
Well, that's terrific. I will ask one more time if there are questions out there. If not, we're coming up to just about 1:45 the hour. Any other questions? Anybody want to raise their hand and ask over the voice line? All right. Well, at this point, I hope you found this to be informative. Certainly, the independent workforce, as you could see, is a major movement and very important to our economy here in the United States, and it's becoming more and more of a preferred and recognized way of people producing their incomes. Without any other questions here, I will say that please come to our website. If you are thinking about independent consulting, if you are an independent consultant, or if you work with independent consultants, I think you'll find our website quite interesting. There's a lot of free content and a lot of good information. There is one more question that popped up, and if I could keep Steve and Carolyn here for another minute, I'll ask it. But it basically is questions telling us that they really enjoyed it. So not a question, but a comment. And thank you very much. And with that, we'll close it down. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.